Hello class. Today we will talk about Longinus on the Sublime. This Longinus is supposed to be a Greek philosopher and rhetorician of the 3rd century. And his actually his identity is doubtful. That is, uh, he sometimes he is referred as the uh, Cassius Longinus. Sometimes he is referred to as Dionysius Longinus. And the manuscript that is recovered in the 10th century, that is known as the Paris manuscript. It says that on it was written Dionysius or Longinus. So it is not at all confirmed. The scholars are not sure that the person who has written this on the Sublime, the treatise, an important critical work of the Greco-Roman tradition on the Sublime, was actually written by this person or that person. So many a times he is referred to as pseudo Longinus. Pseudo means wrong or fake. So but it is for sure that on the Sublime is an important treatise of literary criticism, and it is the beginning of, it is considered as the beginning of romantic tradition in the history of literary criticism, in the history of classical literary criticism. um, Actually, we have to study this on the Sublime with the clarification, with the explanation or understanding the meaning of the word sublime, or what is sublimity. Sublime is something very ecstatic, something that gives us lots of happiness and joy, something that elevates us, something that is lofty, or high, having high moral standards, and like that. So sublimity, Longinus was talking about sublimity in literature. And before Longinus, there was this tradition that is from Plato, Aristotle, or Horace, and all these critics of Greco-Roman tradition, they considered that the job of a writer, the job of literature or poet is to instruct, to delight, and to persuade. To instruct is to teach. To delight is to make somebody happy, and to persuade is to convince regarding something right or wrong. So again, it comes into the moral category. So these were the principles, these were the purposes of poetry in particular, and literature in general, as per the classical tradition of Greco-Roman critics, who were basically the philosophers. Now this Longinus, he was a rhetorician as well as a philosopher. And as we know that Horace's this Ars Poetica was addressed to, it was actually known as Epistle to Pisos. There was a gentleman, Piso, and his two sons, and Horace had addressed his treatise, that is Ars Poetica, art of poetry, to these Piso and sons. So just like that, Longinus had addressed this on the Sublime, this treatise, to a person named Postumius Terentianus. Remember the name of the person to whom this Ars Poetica was addressed. It was Postumius Terentianus, right? And this treatise, that is on the Sublime, was written in Greek language. Of course, this treatise is not in the whole form. It is much of it is lost in the course of years, and it is said that generally one third of it is missing. However, the major argument of this is sublimity in literature. And according to Longinus, sublimity is sublimity in literature is not only the matter of art, because before because before Longinus, it was considered that to write literature or poetry, depending upon or following the rules of the Greek and Roman tradition, was the best way to express oneself, and was the best way to become a good writer or a great writer. But Longinus says that he says something different, and according to him, in order to make writing sublime, it must have a fourth quality apart from to delight and to instruct and to persuade. He talks about another thing, and that is sublimity, that is the power of a writer or power of a work of art to transport or to move or to elevate. Elevate is to take to higher limits. To transport is to move from one place to another. So here the effect of good writing or great writing on the reader should be that it should be able to move the reader beyond himself or herself. The reader must forget his or her own existence, or the reader must forget whatever is around him, and the reader must be able to transport, to move the writer must be able to move the readers. So this is as far as sublimity in literature is concerned. So sublimity is the power of speech or the power of writing that not only excites or moves or but it excites the reader, it moves the reader, it transports the reader, or it takes the reader to higher limits. So this is known as the sublimity in literature, that is highest quality that takes the reader to higher and higher levels of happiness or understanding or transportation or emotional movement, etc. And according to then the next part of the treatise is the sources of the sublime. What are the sources of the sublimity? And according to Longinus, both nature means here the gift of nature, the ability, the inherent capacity of the human beings, and art is the skill that can be learnt. The skill or speciality or art is something that can be learnt by external sources. So Longinus gives weightage to both the sources, and he talks about three major sources. Two are natural, and three come from art. That is, three can be learnt. So there are 5 sources of sublimity. The first is grandeur of thought, that is greatness of thought. Unless and until the thoughts are great, one cannot be a great writer. And this grandeur of thought, this greatness of thought is natural in a person, is the inherent quality of a person, and it cannot be learned, it cannot be acquired, but it should be there in a human being naturally. So this is grandeur of thought, which is the first source of the sublimity in literature. The second is capacity for strong emotion. The person, in order to become a great artist or a great writer, must be capable of strong emotion. He or she must experience the strongest of emotions, and this is again another natural source of sublimity. So these first two, that is grandeur of thought and the capacity for strong emotion, these are the two sources of sublimity, which come naturally. Then the rest of the three, the third is they can be acquired, they come by art. The third is appropriate use of figures. Figures means the figures of speech. Proper use of figures can be learnt, it come by art, and that is also necessary for transporting the reader beyond himself or beyond herself, that is for this aspect called sublimity in literature. So the third source of sublimity is appropriate use of figures. The fourth is nobility of diction. Noble means morally good, kind, and diction is the art of writing, the style of writing. So, nobility of diction is the fourth source of sublimity, and that can be acquired, that comes by art. And the fifth and the last source is the dignity of composition. Dignity is a standard, it is of high quality, and composition is the writing. So this dignity of composition is another source, that is the last source, which come by art, and it is the arrangement of words. Dignity, composition is the arrangement of words, and dignity is there should be a certain respectable standard, there should be some high standard, and it is such that it should be a combination of thought and emotions and figures and words. They should be properly mixed, they should be properly blended, and then only the dignity of composition can be brought there. As far as the fourth source of sublimity is concerned, that is the nobility of diction. This nobility of diction comes from two things, that is the first is proper choice of words. The writer, the poet must choose proper words, and he or she, the writer, must be able to use the metaphors in an effective way, as well as the ornamental language, the figures of speech. So these two are related with the nobility of the diction, and this is very important according to Longinus, and this is the fourth source of sublimity according to him. And he as far when he was talking about the figures of speech, ornaments of speech, he talks about metaphor and hyperbole, these two figures of speech. And before him, the philosophers like Aristotle or Theophrastus or Quintilian, orators, rhetoricians, philosophers, they had provided some guidelines regarding whether what number or how many metaphors should be used by a poet. But Longinus says that it's not correct, it's not proper, because the writer must not face any limitation, and the writer must be free, the poet must be free to use any number of metaphors as per his own decision, as per his own likes and dislikes, because the metaphors are the language of passion. They are highly emotional kinds of language, and there should not be any limitation, there should not be any control upon the poet regarding the number of metaphors that can be used in his or her poetry. Regarding the hyperbole, another figure of speech, he just says that there should be the use of hyperbole must be in a natural manner, the natural outcome of emotional, it should be the natural outcome of emotion. The hyperbole must be a part of the emotion that is there in the great work of art that one is writing. So he especially in the fourth source of sublimity, that is nobility of diction, he talks about these two figures of speech mainly, that is metaphor and hyperbole. And when we come to the third source, and that can be achieved, that can be acquired by art, and that is the appropriate use of figures. So he talks about this in much length, because he was a rhetorician first, and again he was a philosopher. So according to Longinus, the figures must be helpful in producing the grandeur, that is greatness, or the high style of writing. And because the figures are important for him, because they give or they impart an element of strangeness for the speech or piece of writing. Because it gives a pleasant surprise when there is ornamentative language, when there is figurative language used by a writer or a poet, it provides a pleasant surprise. It has an element of strangeness, and that makes the reader attracted towards the writing. So Longinus was on the side of the appropriate use of figures. And he says that a figure, when it is effectively appearing in a disguise, it is a matter of brilliant style. The style of a writer or a poet becomes brilliant when it comes with the figures of speech. And the important figures of speech that he talks about, which are the marks, which can be considered as the criteria of sublimity, are the rhetorical question, Asyndeton, hyperbaton, and periphrasis. So he talks about four figures, uh, and the first of these is a rhetorical question. Rhetorical question is, it is a statement in a question form, and which expects an answer. It is like a tag question, so where the question where that demands an answer or agreement, right? So it is a rhetorical question. Or there may be a rapid succession of question and answer, so that is also a rhetorical question. And why this is important according to Longinus? Because it makes a straight appeal to the passions. It attracts the passions of the reader, or the audience or the spectator. So that's why he says this rhetorical question is an important figure. Then the next figure of speech that he talks about is Asyndeton. Asyndeton is words or clauses which are used without any conjunctions. Generally, the words and clauses are joined together by the conjunctions like and or so or but. But when these are used, when the clauses or words are joined together without any conjunctions, they are loosely held together. So then that gives a special beauty to them, that makes them attractive. So apart from the rhetorical question, he talks about this Asyndeton also. The third quality, the third figure of speech that he talks about is hyperbaton. That is, when the normal order of a sentence, the normal sequence of words in a sentence is disturbed deliberately. Because there is always an order to the word, like first there is subject, then there is verb, then there is object or complement, then there is adverbial element. So there is this proper order of a clause or a sentence, but when it is deliberately disturbed, it makes the sentence or it makes the dialogue attractive. And for that reason, it has an element of surprise or it has an element of strangeness. So hyperbaton, that is the deliberate disturbance of the proper order or sequence of the elements of a sentence, is known as the hyperbaton. Then the last figure of speech he talks about is the periphrases. And this is also very important according to Longinus, and it gives uh, an attractive quality to the piece of writing. And this periphrasis means a roundabout way of speaking. For example, roundabout means indirect way. It is not the direct reference. For example, fair sex is used, is a roundabout way of talking about womankind. Or the direct expression is wife, but the indirect or a roundabout way of speaking about a wife is better half. So these are some examples of roundabout way of speaking, and that is an element, that is a source of sublimity in literature according to Longinus. So these are the three sources of sublimity, that is appreciation, appropriate use of figures, nobility of diction, and dignity of composition. So these three are the sources of sublimity that can be acquired, that can be learnt by practice, that can be learnt by rules. Then let us turn to the first two sources of sublimity, which are very important for sublimity in literature according to Longinus. So the first is grandeur of thought, greatness of thought. A person, in order to become a great writer or a poet, must be great naturally. His thoughts must be great. He must be capable of strong emotions. So, grandeur of thought, greatness of thought, because he says sublimity is the echo of greatness of the soul. The soul of a person, the spirit of a person must be of a great man, and that's why he will be able to produce noble or great literature. And the second source of sublimity, according to Longinus, which is again a natural source, is the capacity for strong emotion. The person must be able to experience strong emotions, and then only he or she can be that is true to oneself, true emotions in the right place, that make the person or his writing great. So these are the grandeur of thought, greatness of thought, as well as the capacity for strong emotion. These two sources of sublimity, they should be there by nature, and they should be there inherent in a person. So in this way, Longinus is considered as, before Longinus, the theory of art was mimetic theory of art, and pleasure was considered as the aim of poetry. Moral instruction was considered as the aim of poetry. But with Longinus, there starts the romantic view of literature, that literature must be able to, it must have the quality, that is sublimity. It must be able to move the reader, it must be able to transport the reader, and then only it can be considered as a great literature. So the this was the beginning of what can be said as the romanticism, or this is aestheticism of literature, and that is most respected quality of a great work of art. So in that sense, from that point of view, Longinus is considered as an important beginning of the romantic strain of literary criticism. Here we will stop. Thank you.